Hello and welcome back to Boxer Shorts. Today we are on lesson 9 of our units on Earth's atmosphere, and it's about to get a little bit political because we're going to talk about something called climate change, which, as you will probably know, unless you live under a rock, is quite the political issue, and a lot of people feel very, very strongly about it. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be unpacking some of the terms and some of the science that's involved, and look at what causes climate change and what in turn it leads to, because it's important that we have to think about climate change as kind of a process of cause and effect. So we're going to start with this fellow who you may have heard of. This is Donald Trump. So I think this is this is before he was the president of the United States of America. And I just wanted to read that tweet. So there's a problem because scientists talk about something called global warming. And global warming is what we spoke about last lesson as this. As the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere increase, the average temperature of Earth increases as well. And the key word there is average temperature of Earth increases. That means the temperature overall across the entire planet will increase. Now, that doesn't mean that in every single place the temperature will be hotter. It doesn't mean that, everywhere in the world will be half a degree hotter. It might be that one place is 1 degree hotter, somewhere else is 1 degree colder. It might be that one place is 3 degrees hotter and one place is only, 1.5 degrees hotter. On average, the temperatures are going to increase, but that doesn't mean that certain places won't still be cold. And what Mr. Trump is doing here is he's confusing weather with climate. Weather is almost, you can think of it as what happens today. Okay, so what is the weather today? It's a bit cloudy. Climate is over time. Okay, so nobody would say, what's the climate of the UK? No one would say, okay, so look, today I look out the window and I look at the news and it tells me it's cloudy with a small chance of rain and it's 7 degrees. No one would say, what's the climate of the UK? Cloudy, small chance of rain, 7 degrees. That's just not how you describe the climate. You'd say that, in the winter months, it's predominantly clouds and chance of rain, not particularly heavy rainfall, mild temperatures, that kind of thing. You don't talk about individual days. So what Trump's doing here is he's looking at an individual day and making a conclusion about the entire climate. And that is a real problem. Because and it's why actually that a lot of scientists don't like when they're talking about this stuff. They don't like using the phrase global warming, and I prefer not to use it as well, because people get confused and they think, oh, global warming means it's just going to be hotter, and a little bit hotter, what's the big deal? It's not such an issue. The first thing is that we're talking about an average temperature change. That's number one. And the second thing is that it's not just the fact that the temperature is changing, it's what that causes. Now, you might think, oh, if it gets a bit hotter, the only difference that'll make is that I might have more ice cream in the summer. That's not the difference it'll make. It'll make profound differences, and changes across the planet. So in general, what we say is that increase. So we had 4 things that looked at when we looked at changing greenhouse gases. So we had deforestation, fossil fuel combustion. We had, what were the other 2? Say them out loud for me, please. What were the other 2? 1, 2, 3. We had cattle produce methane. And we had rice produce methane, or growing rice produces methane. That's probably a better way to put it. Let's change that completely. Growing rice produces, that's better, methane. Now, all of these things contribute to or cause they contribute to global warming. which in turn causes something else. And what it causes is, actually I'll just write causes there, or leads to, causes what we call climate change. And climate change just refers to like the changes that are happening in long-term weather and atmospheric conditions. And there are four things we are going to look at, four kind of aspects to climate change that we are going to look at together. The first one we're going to look at is melting ice caps. So at the North Pole and the South Pole, there's a lot of ice. And that ice kind of, so you've got water and you've got ice floating in that water. You've also got bits of land. So we keep going with the brown for the land. But the land is like this, and it's covered in ice, like that. Again, this isn't like, again, I'm doing a simplification. It's not everywhere. But as the temperature of the Earth overall increases, this ice starts to melt and get smaller and smaller. And this ice starts to melt as well and dump into the oceans. Now, if this ice melts, if the ice that's on the land melts, it can increase the sea level. And we'll look at that a bit later on. But there's also a major problem here. Like if you're a polar bear, and this is a polar bear, then you're pretty sad if that ice melts. If you live on ice, whether that ice is on land or whether it's floating, like that's a major problem for you in terms of your habitat loss. So melting ice cap leads to habitat loss. There are other, there are lots of other problems associated with that as well. Like I said, if the ice is on land, it can contribute to sea levels rising. And also, actually, interestingly, ice does a really good job of reflecting light from the sun, so it actually cools the Earth down a bit. So with less ice, we have less cooling, which makes everything even worse. But for the minute, we'll just stick with we'll keep it simple, and we'll just look with we'll just look at single items. Though of course, like I said, all of this is more complicated. And if we look at, so I think I've got some data for you here on that. Yeah, so this is a graph from the American, again, oceanic something or other, and it looks at how the ice volume has changed over time. Just have a look at that for me, please. So again, like we saw in the last lesson, it's never like just a straight direct line. It's always a bit kind of choppy and up and down and up and down. But overall, over time, from 1980 to 2010, the ice volume has decreased. And that is quite substantial in some areas and leads to major problems in terms of habitat loss and biodiversity, which is about the number of living things that can kind of live in a particular place. Now, I said to you before that another problem here is that the sea levels can rise as well as the habitat loss. But even if the temperature of the Earth just generally increases, the sea levels rise. And the reason for that is because if you have water like this, if you increase the temperature of that water, so you increase the temperature, you make it a little bit hotter, the volume of that water increases. So it starts to occupy a bit more space. Now, of course, so much of the Earth is covered in water. If we increase the temperature of all of that water and all of that water increases by just a little bit, overall, that's quite a significant change. Now, if you are out in the ocean, right, let's say this is the ocean, and you live on an island like this, and you've built your house over there, it doesn't take much for the water to rise by just a little bit for your house to all of a sudden be underwater. And this is true of humans, it's true of plants, and it's true of animals. That as sea levels rise, habitat and places to live decrease. And again, that leads to habitat loss. And by the way, it's really important that you realize, okay, all of these things, this habitat loss that I'm talking about at the moment, right, that's not the difference between having one ice cream in the summer or two ice creams. That's like the difference between an entire species being able to live and an entire species being like, just cut out of existence and going extinct. And again, so there's an interesting place called Kiribati, which is a Pacific island, and Kiribati is in like serious danger of the whole thing being completely submerged. So just write that down. No, don't write that down. Sorry, read that. What we're talking about. So this is already in 2014, and there's been a big international effort to try and help Kiribati. But the like the simple fact is that people live there for hundreds of years perfectly happily, and then comes along the Industrial Revolution, which happens elsewhere. It's not even happening in Kiribati, and people in Europe are burning up fossil fuels and doing deforestation and stuff. And suddenly the sea levels start to rise, and places like Kiribati feel the brunt of that problem. Another issue I think I've got a graph, is about extreme weather events. So a normal weather event is like it is raining. A not normal weather event is like a tornado, right? Or a massive hurricane. Yeah. So there's huge winds and the storms and things like that. Scientists predict that as the temperature of Earth increases overall, we'll get more extreme weather events. Things will just start to get a bit crazy with the weather. And we can look at some data. And this is from this is from the Met Office, so this is UK data. It's across the whole world, and what they do is they break down each year into different events, and I'll just let you have a look at that first. And I'm hoping what you can see again is that over time, all of these events are increasing. So if you go to, 2015, 2016, the number of extreme weather events is much higher than it was back in the 1980s. And this has been exacerbated, and it seems like every single year we're hearing of more and more extreme weather events. And again, this is predicted by scientists quite extensively. Now, what does that lead to? What are the problems here? So we go back to our little flowcharty type thing, and we go, here we are. Right, we have extreme weather events. And that can cause widespread habitat damage. So, if a tornado, like if you're, if you're living somewhere and a tornado goes through where you live, then it's not going to be a particularly pleasant place for you to be alive. But there's also crop effects. Oh, not effects. So if you've got a massive field of wheat and you're making bread to feed billions of people, and a hurricane just destroys your entire field, or a flood destroys your entire field, then all of a sudden that's a lot of people who can't really eat anymore. Food prices go up, poor people suffer. And then the final one is changes in rainfall patterns. So a rainfall pattern is kind of where and when the rain falls. So even though an individual day, no one's going to be able to say, right, next year so it's currently 2021 in September, on the 8th, it's going to rain. No one can predict that. No one's going to say, on the 15th of September, it's going to rain 4 millimeters in London. No one does that. But you can say overall in September, based on previous rain, it will rain by this amount. And in October, it will rain by this amount. And in November, it will rain by this amount. But unfortunately, all of that is changing. And areas which were already quite wet in terms of the amount of rain get wetter. And areas which were dry get drier. So that is kind of very similar in terms of the effect to the first one. Humans can survive in lots of different temperatures and weathers. If the temperature goes up a bit or down a bit, like that's okay for us. If it rains a bit too much, a bit too little, that's okay for us. But it's not okay for crops. Again, if you've got a field and you're growing wheat and there's not enough rain, or there's too much rain, that means your crop, your wheat, doesn't grow. And there's this thing called the Palmer Index, which looks at the change in rainfall over time. So these brown areas show you how dry areas have got drier. So areas like the Sahara Desert over here have got drier over time. and some areas which were quite wet already have got wetter over time. So, you know, United States tends to be a bit wet, and especially areas like this that get tropical weather off the sea, but they get even wetter. Areas like this over here, which is the rainforest, they've got drier over time. So it's not, you know, this hasn't affected the whole world the same amount. Some places have got wetter, some places have got drier, and that is a real problem for animals and for plants, even if we don't necessarily feel it ourselves or notice much difference. Okay, so all of this information, right, I've summarized for you in a table that I'm going to show you in a sec. If you want, you can write that down, but I'm not going to force you to. But the key point here is that it's about process. It's about things leading to other things. And it might be that, yeah, it feels hot today. So it feels cold today. So you don't feel like there's global warming going on. But overall, across the entire planet, this stuff is happening and it is majorly problematic. So there's a little table here, which you can copy down now. Pause the video, copy that down. Okay, you should have written that down by now. The thing, before we get onto the questions, the one thing that I'm going to recommend to you is, like I keep saying to you, it is more complicated. There is more to this story. And what I would really recommend is that you go onto Netflix, and there is a documentary called called One Planet with David Attenborough, and it is brilliant because it shows you all of this stuff. It shows you exactly what's happening in terms of animals and plants and crops and all of that stuff. So it gives you videos and images of all of that where I can just describe it, and I don't want to go into more detail for these videos anyway. So here are some questions as per usual. Pause the video. I'm just going to make this a bit more easy to be seen on your screens. There we go. Pause your video, have a go at these questions for me, please. Okay, you should only be listening to my voice now if you've answered those questions. Let's have a look at some answers. How could climate change result in there being less food available for humans? So change in weather patterns. Or I guess, sorry. This is a big question. Like, there's loads of different ways you can answer it. So actually what I'm going to do, you know, I'm going to get my keyboard out and I'm going to type answers for these because it'll be quicker and easier for you to follow along. So up here we'll go, where's my mouse? Come here, there we are. So changes in rainfall affect crop growth. We can do extreme weather events. Crop growth, and I'm going to zoom this one out as well. Let's pop this back to there so that everything is fitting on your screen nicely. What else can we do? Sea levels rising, reduce space. And there's loads of other stuff as well, but that's what we'll focus on for the minute. So cause humans to leave their homes in large numbers. So first, extreme weather events cause physical damage, and that can lead to people having to move. But perhaps more importantly, sea levels rising. Why are sea levels rising? The main thing here is because of the increased temperature causes the water to expand, and also there is land-based ice melting is also a problem, but we're not going to focus on that because it's a bit of a misconception. People think that that's the real issue, that's why sea levels are rising, but it's way more complicated in terms of what happens with the ice. Why are ice caps melting and how could this affect polar bear populations? They melt due to increased average temperatures, and there's less space for bears and other animals, including their prey, to live. Student in London takes data for the temperature in December over 5 years, notes that the average temperature is decreasing every year. Why would it be incorrect to claim that global warming is a myth? Because global warming is about average temperatures across the whole planet, not just one place. And then from memory, name 4 changes to climate that are caused by global warming. So that is our table up here above, and I'm not going to go into those again. So that's the end of this video. I do once again encourage you to go out, read more, watch more. Anything by David Attenborough is definitely going to be well worth your time. It might depress you as well, but hopefully it should galvanize you. It should make you feel energetic about making change and trying to convince people to do things a little bit differently. In our next lesson, we will look at something called carbon footprint, and we won't spend a huge amount of time on it because it actually comes up in more detail in our next unit, in a different unit in the chemistry GCSE. And then following that, we'll look at other problems with burning fossil fuels and how they cause widespread misery, not just through global warming. Thank you again for listening. I will see you soon.